Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth, and danced the skies on laughter silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of some split clouds, and done 100 things you have not dreamed of.
One word to describe the Spitfire, and that's magic.
It's the nearest thing to having wings oneself and flying.
A very, very deadly killing machine.
But in the air, the Spitfire was an absolute dream.
Salisbury, Wiltshire, England, 1940. Almost 10% of the civilian population have signed the Official Secrets Act. Why?
I had to keep silent even from my parents, you see.
I don't think anybody knew that there was a Spitfire factory there. I can say now we all put our heart and soul in it because we knew we wanted the Spitfires.
The year is 1940. Deep in the green rolling countryside of Wiltshire, a covert army of civilian workers are gathering out of sight of the Luftwaffe. Unknown to the local population, chosen members of the public were secretly building Spitfires in their thousands.
I had notification from the government, I had to report for war work. Then they decided which factory I would go in, I suppose, and put me in that one, in the Spitfire factory.
They sent me here to work as a lad of 16, and I worked in that building there. I believe this was the stores, if my memory is correct.
They became totally autonomous, which meant that they were building entire aeroplanes in each of those places.
Since the declaration of war against Germany in 1939, England had been relatively safe from attacks. Other than a small series of probing strikes against British ships in the Channel and ports in the south, England seemed relatively unscathed. No one knew how long this would last, as Hitler was still debating whether to invade Britain or Russia first. But the calm never seemed that real. For the story on the other side of the water was not the same. Hitler is achieving his plans for conquering Western Europe. His armies march on relentlessly. The vastly superior forces crush and destroy all in their way. Over 100 million people are under the control of the Nazis. Just as Napoleon did 100 years before him, Hitler decides to invade England. The aim is then to attack the United States. The plan is simple. Knock out the RAF and its bases, get control of the air and the channel, bomb and destroy communications and transport links, and then send in the invading forces. With their vast superiority in the air, resistance would be futile. But no one bothered to tell the British that. What the Nazis didn't realise was that the outnumbered RAF had a secret weapon. The Spitfire. This incredible aircraft became the nemesis of the Luftwaffe and destroyed hundreds of their aircraft with few losses to themselves. This resistance was intolerable to the Nazis. They had to destroy the RAF, and especially the Spitfires, by bombing the airfields and the factories where they were being made. Southampton on the south coast of England was a prime target. It was, as it is today, a strategic major shipping port and industrial area. 2 supermarine factories were based here on the Itchen River, producing hundreds of aircraft, and in particular, Spitfires. On September the 24th, 1940, the Luftwaffe launched raids on these factories. The first raid on the Tuesday missed both factories, but destroyed most of the surrounding houses, resulting in heavy losses of civilian lives. Two days later, on the 26th, they returned. Both factories were completely destroyed, along with most of the workers and skilled engineers. The Nazis had achieved their purpose. The south of England Spitfire production was totally wiped out in one bombing raid. What to do? Norman Parker, historian, aeroplane engineer, author and eyewitness to these previously untold events, explains.
Lord Beaverbrook himself, who was the Minister of Aircraft Production, came down to Southampton. Vickers took over the 4th floor of the Polygon Hotel down near the docks. Overnight, Beaverbrook decided that the whole of the Spitfire production in the southern England would be dispersed, totally dispersed. A radius of 50 miles around Southampton. A bunch of engineers, and they were given a car, a set of maps, and a policeman in uniform. And they were told to go out and find places which would be suitable for us to use for Spitfire production. And this policeman was in there to enforce the law.
Reading was chosen as one centre, as was Trowbridge. But Salisbury was the main dispersal site and became the biggest and most productive site of the three.
They asked about 30 of us, would we transfer to Vickers Supermarine Service Department to work on the Spitfires, do the same work on the Spitfires we were doing in the Wellington, and they were short of people. So I transferred over to Supermarine.
Salisbury lies in the heart of Wiltshire. On the surface, it's quiet, gentle and rural. But back during World War II, under the calm, serene exterior, it was an industrial machine turning out thousands of Spitfires for the war effort.
People, if they were not in work that was entitled war work, they could be directed into doing war work.
I was a hairdresser, and I had notification from the government, and we had to report to this place in Salisbury to be examined, medical examination. And from there we were told to go to this other place, which was the Wessex Motor Garage. And I can remember saying to her, well, why have we got to go there? I said, we don't know nothing about cars. And she didn't have a clue, and she was plodding along with me. We went into this place, and the noise, it was terrific. All you got was brr, brr, brr. We couldn't hear one another speak. We were shouting at the top of our voices. And I was introduced to a man who was the charger hand, and he told me that I'd pass the exam, apparently, to go in there to be a riveter.
They took over the sites in Salisbury about December of 1940, and their first aeroplane was flying by March.
I grew up in Orchard Road, Bemerton, left school at the age of 14, and at the age of 16 I was sent to these premises, which were then Witt and Vincent's car body repairers. They had turned over to Spitfire production.
So then, of course, when I got to the age of 18, I was called up And at that time, they were not taking anybody into the forces. Unfortunately, I always feel it's a shame, because I'd love to have gone into the RAF. And that is when I ended up at Worldworthy's Spitfire factory. It was a very big factory. Mind you, I saw very little of the factory floor because I was upstairs working in the laboratory and I was testing piston rings.
Commandeered from my job in Portsmouth with the Navy for this particular job because I was the only one who had the skills to do it. In the drawing office there were 100 draftsmen and 10 tracers, and they did all the drawings for the factories. My group was Jerry Gingell and 3 artist draftsmen and myself. And we had to do the assembly drawings.
And they asked you, would you like to be a land girl or in the Air Force, Army, and that, you know? And I said, no, I couldn't milk a cow. I couldn't milk a cow.
We wanted to do parachute packing because the aerodrome was next to...
That's right, you see. And then my mate and I said, what should we do, Phil? She said, we're going to Spitfire. So we did.
I had to keep silent even from my parents, you see.
What we have here now is the rear of the Wilton Dorset bus garage, which faced onto Castle Street, where it was really the centre of Spitfire production in Salisbury, because there were 3 units off Castle Street which were involved in the actual Spitfire production line. Wilton Dorset bus garage here and across the road, and also down on in the middle of those houses there was another factory going back up into the Wilton Dorset bus garage yard. They also used the area behind those black doors into a yard which was part of the bus garage as well, all of which was introduced as part of the Spitfire production.
There are very few images surviving from this period, as not many knew of the existence of the factories. Taking pictures would have been seen as espionage. However, there were those admirers of the Spitfire who kept records. One such person was a young milk delivery boy who made drawings of the locations at early morning, before the shutters were pulled down to hide what was beyond them.
The Anna Valley Motor Garage in Castle Street, which I visited several times being a telegraph boy, we of course had to sign the Official Secret Act. And we were allowed to go in lots of these places that the ordinary general public was not allowed to go into. And when you went into the Spitfire factories, it was a real eye-opener because the bodies of the Spitfires was all in line like you see in these American aircraft factories now. And there was girls, they had trousers on as well in those days. And they were working on the bodies with men, mainly older men that weren't able to go to service to fight. And the same with the wings. The wings were in line all up through the site of the factory. It's quite amazing the number of people that worked in there to produce them. And they used to come out on long vehicles, bodies of Spitfires in Hull, and the wings on these long vehicles, and they used to be assembled up at high posts, so I was told.
Once the fuselage had been made, there was a lot of work putting all the bits and pieces in. So they opened up another factory in Castle Road, which is just short of Old Sarum.
This is Castle Road, and what is now the car park was the actual factory floor of Spitfire Factory number 1. This site here saw the building of 2 sites. In this particular building, they were using as a final assembly. The fuselages were being brought up to the stage whereby they were ready to achieve the wings, but they had engines, cowlings and so on, would be built up and then taken up to high post. This was factory number 1. The second factory was built about a year later, and that was built down below us, and is still there to this day.
Of 22,000 Spitfires built in Britain during the war, 15,000 were lost. Reading and Trowbridge had their own production lines, but Salisbury was the most productive of the 3 centres. building some 2,500 Spitfires.
This thing is like the gun that I used to use when I was riveting. They were damned heavy, I can remember that, and you'd have to get in such awkward corners with them sometimes. Aim them down, aim them up in the air. I hated when you had to aim them up in the air, although I did have my shoulder to lean on a little bit when I'd done them that way. You always relied also on the person that was holding them up for you. We used to call them the holder-uppers.
For the rivets to be put in the big salt bath. Yeah. And then you get back and go at his time, he'd tell you when the rivets were soft, were ready enough, and then you'd use them when you wanted them. And
you had to do it quickly.
Oh, God, cold. Yeah.
We had a mixed bag of labour here, mostly ladies of various ages. And as you can probably imagine, at the age of 17, it forwarded my education quite considerably.
But they gave me these dungarees, and I said, I'm not wearing those. And they said, but you've got to. You've got to. You just got to, and that's it. So I went out in the cloakroom and put these blooming dungarees on, and the crutch came down to my knees. And I was rolling, you know, I had to roll them up, bottoms and all. And they kept falling down, I kept falling over myself and all. So I took them home and cut them off. The crutch was still down here, mine, but I cut them off, and they were a bit more comfortable.
But when we were at Bradley Road, Queen Mary came there, and our boss come along to us and said, everybody's got to wear clean overalls. And I said to my mate, I can't see this. I said, why have we got to clean up all our benches and wear clean overalls? No, I said, she's coming to see people working here. And whose bench did she stop at? Ours. And he wasn't very happy, believe me. He wasn't at all happy.
We've been bombed, dive bombed, high-level bombed, machine gunned, been through 2 invasion scares. The last lot we had the house down about our ears. But we're still sticking it, and we're going to stick it.
At Hilperton Road, we done the ribs that goes on the plate on the wings, and they go various, like this, right the way down. And you never, when you put the nuts and bolts in that held them onto the booms, you know, the big booms, we had 2. You never had to scrape any of the paint off. You had to be very, very careful.
Typical German efficiency meant most of the aeroplanes were built by heavy machinery, with as few parts as necessary in one place and mass-produced. The Spitfire, however, had 10 times as many parts. But Spitfires could be built in many covert buildings by hand. So if one building was bombed, only one small part of the Spitfire production needed to be replaced. Factories were never obvious. Right in the centre of Salisbury, behind the legitimate facade of Wessex Motors, Spitfire fuselages were being built.
I suppose I worked there 2-3 years. In all that time, I never ever saw an aircraft move out of the factory. Never. And then one day we were coming back from the canteen, and the long run of the roads in front of us was going this great big long thing, you know, and this was one of the aircraft, and they said, oh, well, that's one of the planes, that one that was at the front going out. When we got back to the factory, they were closing the doors, and they were on like a concertina. You would never have known that whole area, whole part, undone, because there were things on the walls of it, you know, that made it look like it was like a wall. You didn't know that the doors opened for the planes to go out of and come in. Nobody knew that I don't think anybody knew that there was a Spitfire factory there.
Unlike their counterparts in Europe, the British did not keep all their aeroplanes in airfields, but rather tucked them away around the countryside, amongst gardens, orchards, and wherever the enemy would not be looking.
They come out with tarpaulins. You didn't see the actual contents, but of course I knew what was in there. And I think Salisbury as a whole was very well guarded, with positions where soldiers could get up on the top of the railway lines. They were about 10 foot wide. Soldiers could put their guns through the gaps in the walls, anything that was kind of warranted. There's 4 rivers actually through the centre of Salisbury. The rivers were a protection, and where there wasn't protection for rivers, they built tank traps all the way round, dug ditches so that tanks couldn't get through. And there must have been a reason for that, because we had barrage balloons even in places like St Thomas's School playground. Every time the siren went, they were winched up.
We thought that they'd repaired Spitfires. We'd see them coming on these like low loaders with the wings folded, and they were going in for repair. I didn't realise that they were going to be fitted out, and we were told that they were repairing them. Had no idea they were building them, no idea at all. And I lived, 3 minutes walk away.
It wasn't until after the war that I realised how extensive Salisbury was for the making of parts of the Spitfires, and how they were all assembled and then flown off from those big sheds up at High Post. That's where they were assembled.
High Post lies about 4 miles outside Salisbury city centre. This is the location of the High Post Aerodrome Hotel, which was built around 1936 and was the clubhouse of the Wiltshire Flying School. Its location was perfect, set deep in the countryside. It was complete with its famous local landmark, the Amesbury all-electric petrol station. But what you saw wasn't all what it seemed.
Well, what we're looking at here now is the only remaining part of the hangar that was used for Spitfire production. And what used to happen, the pieces of the aircraft, with the fuselage, wings and so on, were brought up on the lorry from Salisbury, and they would be taken into the hangar here through where this little bit of a modern building is. That was a large doorway. Component parts were taken in there, assembled, tested, taken out onto the airfield, and then flown out to the RAF maintenance units. From here to where Kemmering is now, that was the airfield. Yeah. But in '43, they closed the road and extended the airfield to the other side of the road. Right. So in fact, there was a runway ran right outside your door here, parallel to the road. Oh, right. Another runway runs from the corner across this way. Yeah. So you'd be driving along on the 345.
Yeah. Maybe right with the level with it.
100 feet away, there'd be a Spitfire landing or taking off.
Just a short distance away from the runway were the 2 main hangars. These were large capacity units able to house and assemble many aeroplanes at the same time. This is also where the experimental unit was based for further development, complete with its drawing office and a team of engineers. During the war, these experimental centres were critical to the ever-increasing competition and development of the fighter planes.
About 500 yards down the road there was another hangar, which was part of the Wiltshire Flying School. That was used for Spitfire final assembly. There would have been 4 or 5 aircraft in here at a time, assembling the wings, propeller on, jacket up, and do all the undercarriage retractions.
About 12 miles to the east of Salisbury lies another location, and as with High Post, an airfield with factories hidden away deep in the countryside. This unassuming small track, now aptly named Spitfire Lane, led to a major manufacturing and distribution site for Spitfires here at Chattis Hill.
This is the approach to the airfield itself and also the factory. The airfield is over behind us.
Well, I've owned this site for about the last 20 years. Every time I walk round, I find another little piece of the jigsaw, and it's quite fascinating to try to piece it all together. And then I meet people such as yourself, which
adds a little bit more to it, so that fills another little bit of the jigsaw.
It does indeed.
So it makes me keen to go round to discover what's here, but very seldom do I take a walk and not go, I wonder what that was for there.
I heard of the factory there from a friend. She was going there to work. And I thought, well, I should have to do more work. And as it was local, I thought I'd apply. I had a brother anyway in the army, so out in Germany, out that way then, Holland and what have you. So you felt you were helping them as well.
Before the airfield was built, the entire area was just a huge copse of trees, very mature trees, as you can see. But in order to get the hangars, there were two of them, they cut the trees down and put in the hangar floor and pulled the rest of the trees back so they could erect the hangar structure itself. Once erected, they let the trees go, hopefully, to camouflage.
Right.
I've had to wash oil filters out in thinners in cold weather. It makes you cry because you get chilblains, no rubber gloves and things, and you get chilblains on your fingers. It wasn't very nice. There were several aircraft in the hangar, 2 lines of them. Everyone would be working on one part and somebody else on another. Then they had an engine run on the ground. The next thing was they were out onto the field and the test pilot would come, take them up in the air. One of our jobs was to wire lock all these all the way round. I can remember one day I had to more or less put one on myself because the man I was working for, I think, couldn't have been there. And I always thought afterwards, well, when I saw one being flown up for test flight, I hope that prop stays on. Because they were all well inspected first.
Large concrete apron you see down here has just been a place to park the aeroplanes while they're working on them, preparing them for flight.
And after that, the girls would come and fly them off to the various aerodromes.
I'd been to Chattis many, many times by either the Anson taxi or the Fairchild taxi, many, many times. And having got there, the Spitfires were all ready for us, but the factory was in amongst the woods, so you couldn't see it, you see. And this big field was where they used to train horses for running, I suppose, and jumping. It was rather on a slope. Nobody else around there. People there were frightfully nice. They used to give me clothing coupons, you know, because they thought us girls didn't have any clothing coupons. They were quite wrong, but it was very interesting.
We had no mess, of course. We weren't in the Air Force at all. We never swore allegiance to the Crown or took the King's Commission. We were paid by the Ministry of Aircraft Production. We were just civilians in uniform. If you didn't have a car, not many did. I didn't even drive because I hadn't learned before the war. I learned to fly before I learned to drive. But the transport picked you up and you went into the restroom and you passed the time till it was fit to fly. And they would hand out the little chitties, we called them. It said what you were going to fly that day. The operations was at Andover, the ferry command then, and they would send the list to White Waltham, to our headquarters, of every aircraft that had to be moved the next day, non-operationally. Headquarters would dole it out to the pools and try to give you lifts back. A wonderful organisation, but we were just there. All we wanted to do was what we fly and fly, you know. It was so exciting.
And it was fun.
Oh, we'd have done it for nothing, I'm sure. I would have done. And yet we were reasonably well paid, so I believe we were the first people to get equal pay for equal work with men.
I was posted down to Hamble then, And the first thing I was given was a Spitfire to fly. Initially, I thought, oh, how terrifying it must be to be in a Spitfire. In those days, it seemed very fast, and everybody was saying it's a wonderful aeroplane. Not only was I told to fly one, but I had to fly two in the same day.
What we had was little a loose leaf folder called Ferry Pilot's Notes, and that was our Bible. And there was, I think, about 250 types, just a page on each, which told you all you needed to know, really. Takeoff, landing, stalling. Don't really need to know much else.
I saw my chitty and the number on the Spitfire, and someone helped me in, and I suppose in a way I was nervous, but I got in the aeroplane, and the little man that was helping me said, "How many of these have you flown?" And I said, "None. This is the first one." And he fell backwards onto the ground.
And I used to say to him, it was a ladies' aeroplane, Gordon. And he said, I don't think Dad had that in mind when he designed it, Joy. But a test pilot once said she was a lady in the air and a bitch on the ground.
Troublesome on the ground. You know, you had this great engine in the front, so you could not see where you were going, and you had to go like that on the ground. And it was rather troublesome.
With so many of these sites producing such large numbers of Spitfires, it obviously made them targets for espionage.
There was the spy's house in Fordingbridge, where two inhabitants were obviously warned to get out, like now, because they actually left their breakfast on the table half-eaten. And when the authorities went into the house, there was a complete aerial array built up in the loft where they'd been transmitting to Germany. Just beyond Coombe Bissett, there were two spies jumped out of an aeroplane just up the road. One of them broke his leg in the process, and his companion went down to Winchester, where he was told to report to a doctor who would be prepared to interest repairing a German airman. But the one that was able to walk, they actually turned him, and he became a British spy working for the Brits.
A lot of people nowadays have come to the realization that the secrecy and the responsibility of individual people, like myself, was so important to the proceeds of the war. And we took it as a matter of course, and we knew the secrecy level, and one just kept to it for the country.
I was in the post office at the time, looking out of the window. I heard this roar as they came across the market square. I think it must have been on Tuesday, because I recall my mother being down in the market square at the time, although I didn't know it then.
My mother had told me to go and get my two younger brothers in for their tea. So I ran across the road, and as I was crossing the road, in the centre of the road, I saw this aircraft coming down, and he was swooping towards us, and I thought, he's a German, I just knew he was going to do something. So there was luckily a hedge there, which I threw my two younger brothers out on the floor, jumped on top of them, squashed them with my arms, and he machine gunned up the road, and I'm sure they were meant for us.
From the right-hand side of the field, only about 50 yards ahead, zero height, it seemed to me, was this plane coming in very slowly.
I looked up, and just over the trees, there was this plane flying over the top of the trees. As soon as Dad saw it, had German markings on it, he just grabbed us, threw us down on the grass, and sprawled himself on top of us. And we were facing towards the plane. He could look up and actually saw the pilot and his light-coloured helmet.
And then orange flames started to shoot out of the wing, leading edge of the wing. Bang, bang, bang. That's one of theirs. And we soon found out what had fallen off.
And dropped his single bomb
in Middleton Road, which is the road just this side of the gasometer, opened fire on the gasometer and set it on fire.
When the siren went and I dived into a little shop, immediately very, very worried, and dashed home, and my husband had already come down to the gasworks to find out what had happened. And my father was halfway up the gas holder, mending the holes, and the fire engines were there, constantly spraying water on him to stop any fire.
And there, in the side of the gas holder, the one on the left, was a big hole belching flame. Massive flames, about 10 foot, I think.
Well over 2,000 Spitfires were built here, but none of the numerous attacks hit the Spitfire factories, as the Germans never knew of their existence. Nor did they know of the vast number of American troops based here in preparation for the Normandy landings.
Well, of course, the Americans caused a little bit of havoc. The reason being that the girls of Salisbury loved to go out with the Yank.
They used to have a van outside with their donuts, selling their donuts. And I always used to love their donuts. They were lovely. They had holes in the middle. And they used to have dances there, and I used to go up there to dances, and they used to put on a truck, a big truck from there, and pick us all up. And there was always two of them on that truck, always. Because that was to make sure none of them interfered with any girls, I suppose.
Well, we used to have well, they made lovely ice cream.
In fact, I can recall walking up Fisherton Street one night, and the Airborne Division was fighting with the American troops, and they lined up on each side of the road and have a go at one another. I can recall that several incidences, because, you know, there was, well, they used to have to relax. That was how they found their relaxation.
And when we did see the silk stockings, how we wished we had a pair.
And they took you to the PX, the equivalent of our naffy, and let you buy lipstick and stockings and things like that.
I can't remember being given any nylons, but probably I wouldn't have worn them anyway because I wasn't really a nylon person.
So I wonder what this is. So we stopped. You could see a little platform above the heads of the crowd, and there were two people in there. I wonder what they're doing. So I said to the chap on the door, "What are they?" "Boxing match," he said. "You got a special guest today." "Have you? Who's that?" "Joe Lewis." "What, the heavyweight boxing champion of the world?" "Yes, he's a sergeant in the army."
So he let me have these tickets, and May and I, my friend May Skeet, she was mad on Glenn Miller like me, so we went, and it was in Victoria Park in Salisbury.
The saxophone section is presided over by that rather portly gentleman near the center there.
You know, it makes it sound as if the war was fun, and it was in a way, because you're only young once, you've got to have the fun where you can find it.
One of the things that Salisbury was noted for was the building of the two hospitals by the Americans. And they built Odstock Hospital, which was used for years after the war by all the citizens of Salisbury.
They said cheerio when they left us one evening, and they said they had a big job on the next day. They were all going to the seaside, but they couldn't tell us where because they didn't even know themselves where they were going. And the next day, we saw some of them, and we asked them where so-and-so was, and the one that I was friendly with, he didn't come back, and he had a little dog that he took everywhere with him, and the little dog and him, they were drowned.
Lots of telegrams had bad news and worrying news. People that were missing in the war, people that had been killed in the war.
Waiting for that telegram boy to pass my mother's house and not go in. Not go in. It must have been dreadful for him.
Most people, it was awful to see them worrying, shaking.
We were at a dance there, and some of them, I'm afraid, had passed away on the journey. They were covered with blankets. Others had their jackets, sleeves torn off and all bandaged up. Some just managed to wave their hand. But it's a sight you won't forget. Straight from the battlefield, they were all muddy. It wasn't very nice.
But whatever adversity, the secret factories never stopped working. They kept up the constant supply of Spitfires to the awaiting RAF pilots.
You know, what's so exciting is to realise that the people of Salisbury were engaged so deeply in the war effort. And they were asked to provide some support to the national effort to produce these Spitfires. And just at High Post and other places near Salisbury, 10% of the Spitfires that were made here in Salisbury. And the fact that for nearly 70 years this story has not been known or well known points to the fact that there is a certain sense of humility.
Any claims, Johnny?
109 destroyed, buddy, yes.
Oh, good show. How'd you get on, sir?
I had a wonderful party, thanks.
Are you all right? You get any of the bladders?
Yes, I got a Messerschmitt 109 and a Dornier.
Arguably one of the aeroplanes that saved and turned the tide of the war, extremely important during the Battle of Britain, but also, of course, an aeroplane that continued to be developed and improved. And as the tech race started effectively between us and the Germans, new aeroplanes and new modifications and new engines and new weaponry came out all the time. And the Spitfire was constantly being updated time and time again to make sure it was at the cutting edge of technology. And the rate at which the aeroplane was expanded and improved was absolutely astonishing. Certainly if you compare it to what we have outside today in the Typhoon, the speed at which the Royal Air Force could modify its aircraft was absolutely phenomenal.
As a fighter pilot, the first time you fly one, you understand what the fighter pilots of old were talking about. And I flew a Mark 16 as my first Spitfire, and the moment that I rolled her, I knew what they meant. The centre of gravity is just pitch perfect. So you can almost fly her on, with a finger and thumb, which is beautiful anyway from a pilot's point of view. But as a fighter pilot, I knew that was very, very important from an air-to-air combat perspective.
If you speak to some of the veterans, when Commander Tom Neal says that both the Hurricane and the Spitfire were inferior to the 109 during the Battle of Britain. But depending on the aeroplane and the pilot, you can do an awful lot with it. For example, in the Battle of Britain, the pilots who were flying Hurricanes and Spitfires had their backs up against the wall, as did everyone in this country. We were fighting, absolutely fighting for our nation's survival.
So you've got to ask yourself the question, why did we do so well in the Battle of Britain and beyond? And I guess you can put that down to, we were defending our homeland, or that generation were defending our homeland, and they were defending the freedoms that we enjoy today. So I'm guessing that those boys who were flying, and indeed the girls and boys that were supporting them, just put that little bit of extra effort and emotion into what they were doing, whether that's on the ground, refueling them, repairing them, building them, and indeed flying them.
Every passing year, the interest in Spitfires increases, and thankfully they have been preserved for future generations by the likes of RAF Coningsby, who house, maintain, repair and fly them alongside other historic aeroplanes at the Battle of Britain memorial flights.
The last time I actually sat on a Spitfire cockpit was 1951. But having said that, before that, I've sat in, well, I would think, possibly hundreds of Spitfires over the years.
Really?
Long time.
Yeah, long time no see.
We didn't see us finish Spitfire. And they said, you're in here to work, not to talk, to work. And I've always remembered that.
Mostly all work, I think it seemed in those days.
No, whatever was required, we just did.
You worked for the country, not for yourself.
Please keep like the work up and do your best for the Spits to make the Spitfires. And that's what we done. We worked 8 till 8. We just had an hour for lunch.
That left an hour then before the next lot came in, the night one, the ones that were working night. It was a month night and a month days.
Oh, I think the Spitfire is the plane in actual fact. It's just the pure lines of it and the way it can spin around in the air and its manoeuvrability. And it's just basically, well, it's just that I've been in love with Spitfires ever since I first held to do anything with them.
Didn't keep wishing that the work would end. Probably wished the war would end, but quite enjoyed the work.
That generation is completely and utterly selfless. They really, really are. They will not hear a word said in their praise. They just did what had to be done, and we owe such a debt to them, yet they often aren't willing to hear that voice of thanks.
So the one thing that I learned from my grandfathers, and indeed from my grandmothers, was what it meant to be around in the 40s. And I guess they projected something across to me about their duty to their country. They had no choice, of course. In the 40s, it was them or be overrun. But the way they described it to me, it kind of drives a big emotion, and it's that one of service. And having been in the Air Force and flown operationally, you get what that means. It's kind of a deep-rooted feeling. It's a bit like a love you might feel for a relative or your partner, but it's something a little bit different, and it's a very powerful emotion.
It was when we heard all the planes going over for the end of the war. Thousands and thousands went over all night long. The sky, it was just aircraft. And my mother said, oh my word, this is it. And we didn't know what this is it was because we were little, we didn't understand. But that was the D-Day, that was the landings, and it was very upsetting. You looked at the bombers going over 1,000, you thought, oh, how many will come back? You're not all going to come back. And I think we were all very sad and tearful because we knew they were going, so many were not going to come back.
And that developed something into what I can only describe as the right stuff. And again, it's a very, very powerful emotion. And it's one that you always have with you, but every now and again, it will trigger and come to the surface. And I've never shed a tear in an airplane before, a jet airplane, but I have in Spitfires. So it's something that you can't control. It just jumps out at you, and again, it's a hugely powerful emotion.
I've topped the wind-swept heights with easy grace, where never lark or ever eagle flew, and why with silent lifting mind I've trod the high untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God.